some years back. Jonathan writes on the topic of architecture and urban culture and is completing a book on the interior public space networks of Hong Kong. In 2010, Jonathan was co-curator of the US Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale and continues to work on exhibition projects on architecture and the city in Asia. And Tom, who will be presenting alongside him, is the Associate Dean and Associate Professor of the Department of Architecture, also at the University of Hong Kong. Tom is formerly a co-director of the AA Design Research Lab here, and he taught design studio and seminars, and I'm actually an ex-student of his at the DRL. Tom was a founder of Ocean in 1995 and has worked for over 15 years within a new model of architectural practice. He is the founder and creative director of Ocean CN, a consultancy network of specialist design consultants based in Hong Kong with links to Beijing, Shanghai, Jakarta, and London. And they are working on urban and architectural projects in China and the Asia region. Tom has written, published, and exhibited and lectured extensively in Europe, North America, Asia, and the Middle East. Please welcome Tom and Jonathan.
How should we do this? Tom and I agreed that I would kick off and hand off to him about midway through the presentation. But let me get started. Hang on a second here. Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Brett, as well, for organizing and hosting this conference. It's an honor to be affiliated with such an interesting group of schools engaged in such important research. And I also thank you for your lengthy presentation on what's been going on at CCA. I'm going to begin, put broadly, I wish that I had the luxury to go today broadly into what's been happening at the Department of Architecture at the University of Hong Kong roughly over the past 6 years. I'm going to focus today, with Tom's help, on a presentation specifically into our current investments into architectural design and fabrication through teaching, research, and through the professional practice of our staff. The first slide here was actually intended, I think, for, believe it or not, an even smaller gathering. In other words, intended purely for our institutional partners, and I promise is the only text-based slide that I will show. This was actually taken directly from a PowerPoint given by the Faculty of Architecture, the unit above us, so I take no credit for it. And it's meant purely to give some sense of what may define the Department of Architecture slightly separately from our other academic partners here today, in that we are not exactly independent. Despite the name of the group. In fact, we are a department nestled within a very large, very protective, major state-funded research university. So in fact, we're the definition of dependent in that regard. Served by a large communist country, of course. So a part of the world, I should say, of course, which we are blessed, of course, that Hong Kong and China both not only are they dedicated to the notion of state funding for teaching and research, but they actually have quite a few funds to spread around, unlike other parts of the world today. This is us. I'm sorry. There we are. This is us. Do I have a pointer? Suppose I do. All right. Yeah, this is us, the Department of Architecture, one of 4 units in the Faculty of Architecture. Just simply to give you a sense of our scale, most of our resources go to teaching and research within 2 programs, a Bachelor of Arts program with 188 students and a Master of Architecture program, both fully accredited, of 164 students. I think actually I'll save further description of this for individual discussions with our partner institutions, but I throw that slide up merely to explain some of the differences in funding models and in research models that we might bring to this overall collaboration. I'd like to begin with a brief review of some of the department's assets towards, broadly towards collaboration, and I want to register at this moment my alignment and our institution's alignment with, certainly with Brett's first two assertions. Although I don't teach or administer in an environment where I'm allowed to say that I don't know how to teach architecture. In fact, if I said something like that on camera, I would get in quite a bit of trouble. But certainly our dedication to architectural education on a project-based model, and also our dedication to collaborative educational and research models. I want to, in the Facebook universe, I like that comment. I want to go through some of our assets in that regard. The first is the department's Shanghai Study Center, and I'm showing here an image actually of the AA Summer School, which was housed at the University of Hong Kong Shanghai Study Center this past August. This is a fully independent, quite modern and very well outfitted space that the University of Hong Kong operates in the city of Shanghai. It has comfortable studio space for 50 students, fabrication laboratory, 3D printing, 2D printing, of course, a gallery, and other presentation spaces. As a site, not only for to send our own students for education and research opportunities in China, but also as a host opportunity for hosting collaborative exchange. The Shanghai Study Center has proved to be a tremendous asset. Another asset of the program is a unit that actually operates at the level of the Faculty of Architecture called the Community Project Workshop, which is essentially a vehicle for the participation of our staff and our students in design and construction projects within the community, both of Hong Kong and of the South China region. The Community Project Workshop runs design projects. For instance, here, students that work on a series of village houses in Guangdong province, also running projects for school construction in rural China, rural bridge construction, a variety of pavilion construction projects in Hong Kong proper in partnership with the Hong Kong government, the Leisure and Cultural Services Department, etc. We are also experimenting for the first time, actually this last spring, with integrating these design build projects with coursework. So for the first time, students in the department are getting credits in the master's program for collaborative work with the Community Project Workshop. And we look to be introducing it soon in the undergraduate program as well. Another asset of the program is our investment in hardware, software, and human resources in computer-aided design and fabrication. I won't enumerate the machines, etc., but we have been on a buying spree, I'll put it over the past 5 years, as part of a series of successful grants for something called the University's Development Fund through the Hong Kong government. Here you see our mill, which was custom made across the Delta in Zhuhai. The mill is supplemented by a series of laser cutters, 2 of which now we have capable of cutting 1/8" steel, allowing us to not only, of course, cut materials for model making, but actually cut building materials that could go into building components or construction. 3D printers, vacuum formers, etc. We're sourcing, I believe we're sourcing a robot arm as we speak. Now, of course, hand in hand with this is an investment in software and human resources for that software. Teaching of Rhino and its various components is now begins in the 2nd year of the undergraduate program, and again in earnest in the master's program. We are also teaching BIM as part of the required curriculum to the master's students. This is part of actually our professional management core courses, since BIM submissions are now required by the Hong Kong Housing Authority, making it a important component of our professional teaching. Finally, a final asset is a research group called the Computational Group, which is directed by my colleague Tom Verebes into the research and teaching in computer-aided design. The main activities of this group, aside from coordinating teaching resources, are to coordinate the application for major research grants within the government grant structure in Hong Kong. And again, given the framework, our university framework, that grant writing and winning process is a necessary first step for undertaking research in these areas. Current research projects range from large-scale investigations into the application of parametric design technologies towards urban planning, to smaller scale or smallest scale experiments into computer fabrication of components, which, when meshed with traditional building practices like bamboo construction in rural China, can lead to new forms of construction in the field. I'd like to run through, and I'm going to run through about half of these and then pass over to Tom, some examples of fabrication in the curriculum at Hong Kong U and in research and practice as well. And this is a kind of, the structure for this will be a brief introduction to the structure of our curriculum generally. Our attitude at Hong Kong U towards architectural fabrication is very much oriented, I would argue, at all levels of the curriculum, in a notion that the next wave of interest in architectural fabrication will come in a way of applying, let's say, some of the more general properties and outcomes of computational complexity, increased computational complexity, with some of the equally as generative limiting factors of local place. And in that regard, all of the work that I'm going to show you will incorporate some tension between, again, the general computational environment and the very specific location, whether that's Hong Kong or the South China region in which we operate. This begins very early in our curriculum, in the first term of the undergraduate bachelor's degree, where students work on a project. This is a project that we ran for 3 years with visiting professors Jesse Reiser, Nanako Umamoto, and our first year Bachelor's 1 studio teachers, where the students basically go out into the city and acquire the kind of detritus of Hong Kong, the plastic cups, paper cups, plastic bottles, cheap toys, etc., and then use that material to create furniture based on the dynamic motion of the body. So whether that's foam tubing or bamboo mats or plastic tubing and zip ties, bamboo skewers mixed with plastic zip ties, shuttlecocks or beanies for the Americans in the audience. Birdies, excuse me. I've been away for so long, my gosh. These are actually scrub brushes, egg crates, etc. They are introduced at a very early stage in their education, before they have the computational skills, to the logics at work in the way in which materials react to geometry and force. By their third year, they've been introduced to a very broad suite of software and hardware and are able to explore those same principles at a much more sophisticated level. And here we have our Bachelor's 3 visual communications classes, in which students are experimenting with Rhino and Grasshopper in the production of towers in the 3D printer, component construction by the laser cutter, and a little bit of post-production in terms of folding, clipping, tabbing, etc. This was a little cities project, knots, etc. But at the same time, that experimentation becomes grounded in the studios in a highly local knowledge. Here we recognize this handsome gentleman, of course, my colleague Tom, guiding third-year students on a tour of one of the largest, or the largest, I should say, precast concrete facility in the world, Redland Precast in Dongguan, just north of Shenzhen. This is a facility that is very large, very noisy. They build very large mock-ups. They do very large things. We also work with, have the opportunity, I should say, within the context of the Pearl River Delta, with its reputation as the workshop for the world still largely intact, of collaborating with a range of different industry partners. Here we see students who've taken brought a series of laser cut molds to Korean, where they will explore essentially heat treating the Korean and molding it on these frames. But the point is that we have a range, whether it's concrete fabrication, steel fabrication, etc., of opportunities to engage hands-on with local industry. I believe I should hand over here at this point to Tom, who can talk a little bit more about how we integrate that knowledge into the third-year studio and then carry us on into the master's program.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was actually me speaking and Jonathan doing a very clever ventriloquism. Thank you very much. No, it's great to be back. I'll just kind of carry on seamlessly. In many of the courses in the third year of the Bachelors and then moving on to the Masters, the focus becomes much particular use of the technologies, of whether digital technologies or material technologies. In the third year, the theme of the third year, which we should say that the curricular structure, very different than the AA, also very different than our master's program, is that there's one brief for the entire year for the 3 years. So it's possible to really get the students on board on specific topics, areas of research, and tool them up in quite specific ways, allowing them later on as they get more mature in their master's level education to experiment on more independently driven issues of studios and then in a thesis later on. So in the third year, the theme is focused on materials and technology. This was a team of students working on CNC molds and casting of concrete, making a series of incredible panels that led towards a small-scale one-to-one mock-up of a pavilion. Some of the other kind of experiments in that year's early initial kind of schemes, which then get tested really at a one-to-one scale of an existing shell of a building. This of a series of L-shaped frames that fit together in a range of diverse ways, creating a kind of variable porosity and related to not just light coming through, but thicker where it's needed for more structure lower down. The studio allows for and creates the space within the workshop and the studio environment to experiment on a one-to-one level of making components to make bigger projects. Here we see a series of molds that bend plywood, which are then riveted together in specific ways to create a structural component that can be aggregated into a larger sort of assembly, and then tested at a much larger scale at a kind of one-to-one scale of intro workshops in the beginning of the year. At the master's studio level, the structure of Hong Kong U MR is very different than the BA in that it's a series of option studios and electives falling under 4 categories of practice management, technology, help me out here. Practice management, technology, independent studies, history, theory. Evidently what we're focusing on here today is maybe more the technology and the management issues, not so much in professional management, but that of of the management of complexity and construction delivery. In this sense, even the studios which deal with maybe projects on a scale of urbanism still engage with the kinds of prototyping technologies, techniques, and the management of complexity of the city being played out, in this case, in this model, through a way of controlling that complexity through very logical, rule-based and simple parts that fit together to build up into more complex wholes. The final semester of the MArch is an independently driven thesis with a tutor following the work, and even on this level there's a level of experimentation which ranges between the representation of architecture in a digital environment, its design and production digitally, but also its kind of crafting by hand to some extent in the kind of more traditional scale models, sometimes which lead towards quite experimental and innovative results. In this case, a kind of mobile circus as a kind of theme for a thesis which led towards a series of deployable temporary built structures through standardized components, creating a range of diverse assemblies. This is some of the outcomes of the Korean casting that Jonathan had presented earlier. Series of heat-formed models which gain the shape of the cast, but also each time done has slight variations and can be arrayed together. Some of the other kind of experiments in an earlier course in Korean, bending, machines that bend the Korean, and also kind of taking the Korean from a CNC set of subtractive methods and creating a series of components that can be arrayed. The elective courses range in quite specific techniques, like many schools would. They are meant to not just give skills and teach the necessary protocols to run the machinery, but also to experiment in ways where the unknown really is kind of the outcome. So it's an opportunity for the staff to also let some of the students loose, in effect, to come up with new and interesting applications of the machinery. In this case, creating a series of interlocking frames that can be cast together. This is a very large scale, sort of 3-meter bed that we have. So this is still a 3-axis machine that kind of assembles a series of parts that link together like a complex 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Some of the other outcomes of the program is becoming more engaged in what we're having to work through what the university calls experiential learning. In our terms, that's more to do with it's what architects generally do anyway, whether it's in a kind of academic studio environment or whether it's within the context of architectural practice or research departments. Project-based research, certainly at a scale of one-to-one prototyping, is a form of experiential learning. We learn by doing. The CPW, Community Projects Workshop, is a vehicle like or not unlike the large institutes within mainland China, but it operates a little bit more in a small practice model of having a range of different kinds of scaled community projects, from, in this case, a series of smaller scale pavilions and furniture pieces for a project called Art Alive within Kowloon Park in Hong Kong, run by 2 of our professors, Wei-Jin Wang and Jason Carlo. And increasingly the CPW is a kind of, it's a vehicle to engage with built one-to-one work while having a sort of altruistic, community-based intentions, but the potential for students and staff to engage in research projects and just really experimental build work as well. Some of the details, I mean, this is also engaging with the kind of local craft, very basic, simple materials, very low budgets. That's one of the features of most of the CPW projects, is that a small budget is brought to the university to work through these projects, and then the constraints within which we work are also, mimic that of conventional practice, usually that of a budget limiting what can be achieved, yet the goal is also to create a research-based kind of architectural engagement. So here we have a kind of adaptation of a standard kind of gate that we find all over Hong Kong, all over many cities, as a kind of unit-based production of adjusting standard pieces, no different than the kind of repetitive model, yet the ways in which they're assembled is highly differentiated, therefore the whole becomes quite complex and differentiated. The CPW has gone very deep into mainland China in a series of projects, some of which triggered by the Sichuan earthquake and the rebuilding afterwards. Rebuilding bridges, in this case working through a set of cast concrete tiles of different sizes and degrees of porosity, letting through, letting through planting such that you eventually get a kind of border for the bridge, and allowing kind of local craft and local people to kind of engage and participate within this the construction process as well. Some of the staff work, this is an exhibition by a research group at Hong Kong U Control Shift with Jonathan, Jason Carlo and John Lin, which worked on a series of projects, eventually leading towards a tower that was exhibited in the 2008 Venice Biennale. And here's an exhibition at Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, of a series of those experiments leading up to it. This is the Oi Botos Gallery by Jonathan's office, a fiberglass facade. This is a door that opens up as the gallery when it's open and closes up afterwards. I'm sure Jonathan can talk more about this. It's in the fashionable Soho area of Hong Kong. I'm not going to venture too far more into detail, otherwise I'll get it all wrong. Another colleague of ours, David Irving, and his partner Clover Lee, who are based in Hong Kong. They've been working on a house called the Lunar House in Texas, working through not just digital media and modeling and processing with Casey Rios, but also a series of material experiments in glass reinforced plastic, glass reinforced concrete to prototype the one-to-one piece of one-to-one house through a series of pieces that test out different kinds of materials and a range of different lighting effects, different potentials for paneling. And this is an ongoing project that they're working towards building. Other staff work, more recent work, Jason Carlo's bench for the 2010 Hong Kong Biennale, a series of Korean laminated pieces that get aggregated with some plywood pieces and installed as a bench into which is kind of network, kind of rhizomatic network that can extend, well, not infinitely, but extensive in a field which is a prototype for urban furniture and event spaces. There you see it installed into the Hong Kong Biennale space. So that's our presentation basically, which centers around the current curriculum and its kind of output within Hong Kong U, the potential of integrating within the kind of research structure of the research-based university, and some of the engagement in some of these issues of digital and material production of the staff. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom and Jonathan. In terms of where we are today, actually we have, unfortunately, CAFA were not able to make it at the last minute. So I'd like to now introduce you, or welcome back, Dr. Jane Burry, who was here, I think, last October, to give us a talk. Jane's research is focused on the place of mathematics in contemporary architectural design, in particular with relation to computational design, modeling, and architecture, of the mathematician in the design team, and understanding computational design through the history and philosophy of mathematics. She has published internationally on these themes and on remote collaboration